Some stories start with something small, a seat, a look, an apology caught in midair. And sometimes it is those small things that shake up a seemingly solid system. That morning at Midland Airport, a young man in a blue suit boarded Flight A17. He had a first-class ticket, Seat 2A, purchased on a corporate account, legal, transparent, nothing special, until a flight attendant looked at him a little too long. An older white woman said, "I always sit in 2A." And a few minutes later, the man was asked to leave his seat, leave first class, and leave the privilege he had paid for. No one knew that the person who was humiliated that day, Jordan Carter, was the son of one of the most powerful businessmen in America. Just 7 minutes later, the entire flight crew lost their jobs, and the entire American aviation industry was shaken. This is not just a story about power, but a story about human dignity, about how one man chose calm over anger and turned his silence into a voice for millions. If you believe that justice doesn't need to be shouted to be heard, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel, because today's journey will make you believe that sometimes just one seat taken away is enough to change the world. That morning, the Texas sky was as clear as a storm had ever been. Midland International Airport had the typical calm of a Midwestern airport, modern and slow enough that you could hear the click of shoes on the polished tile floor. Jordan Carter wheeled a suitcase through the VIP check-in area, tall and straight-shouldered, wearing a fitted white shirt and a simple black watch on his wrist. There were no flashy logos, no escort, no indication that he was the only son of Leonard Carter, founder of Carter Global Holdings, a conglomerate with offices on 3 continents. They called him the rightful heir. Harvard Business School, 4 years at Magellan and Pierce, and then a return to his father's company as a strategic advisor. But Jordan rarely spoke of those things. He believed that background did not dictate character. Today, he flew to Newford City, where the Carter Global Board of Directors was meeting to finalize the acquisition of a European logistics chain. Aurora Air Flight number A17. First-class ticket. Seat 2A. Booked and paid for from the group's corporate VIP account 3 weeks ago. Everything was as carefully prepared as his working style. He arrived 2 hours early. No one rushed him. No assistant accompanied him. Jordan preferred to do the paperwork himself, a habit his father had taught him since he was a child. If you want to understand how people treat the world, look at how they treat people they think are unimportant. He still remembered that sentence. Every time he entered the airport, he heard it echo in his head, like a silent test. The VIP counter was empty. The staff greeted him with a professional smile. Everything went smoothly: boarding pass printed, luggage tagged, priority. Nothing could have told him that. Just a few hours later, that same ticket would become evidence in a racial discrimination case that would be discussed nationwide. Jordan walked through the screening area, past the duty-free shop, and stopped for a black coffee. He didn't have his laptop, just his iPad with some notes for the meeting. Passers-by gave him passing glances, some curious, some judging, some familiar, not because they knew who he was, but because his skin color spoke before he even opened his mouth. I learned to smile at those looks, not because I was weak, but because I understood. Anger cannot change anyone's eyes, but calmness can make them look at themselves. The boarding call rang out at gate B7. Jordan stood up, took a final sip of coffee, put his cup in the trash, and headed for the boarding gate. The VIP gate was separate. The staff bowed their heads to check tickets, smiled at him. Everything was proper, first class. On the fuselage of Aurora Air Flight A17, The silver logo reflected the morning sun. Jordan paused, looking at the giant metal block before him, taking a deep breath. He still liked this feeling, the moment before takeoff, when everything was still in order. Inside the first-class cabin, the lights were soft. The seats were cream-colored leather. The air smelled of bergamot and new leather. The passengers were chatting softly, some with laptops open, some with phones. Jordan stepped up, still smiling. He showed his ticket to the head stewardess standing at the door. The name tag read Megan Hartley, 15 years experience, standing tall. Her face so calm it seemed like nothing could shake her. She looked at the ticket, her eyes lingering for a moment, ever so slightly. Then she looked at the ticket again. It was a small movement, but Jordan felt it like a musical instrument being out of tune, something only a sensitive player can hear. She said evenly, "Sorry, there seems to be a slight error in the system. Let me check with the portal." Jordan nodded. Behind him, the line of passengers began to gather. Someone coughed. A middle-aged man muttered, "Let's move." Jordan stepped aside, keeping out of the way. The light from the window fell on his face calm, composed, almost too calm for someone who had just been suspected. System error. I had heard that phrase many times in my life. Each time, it had a different face, a different voice, but the same meaning. You don't belong here. Megan called the radio, her voice low, quick and brief. Jordan looked around. The people in first class were still talking, but he could feel a few eyes glancing over, then away. Nothing happened, at least on the surface. There was only a brief pause, a slight frown, a deep breath, before he took a half-step back, like a man making room for the world to pass, waiting for justice to take its course. Megan took the ticket, glanced at him again, her eyes not hostile, but filled with a suspicion she didn't recognize. She said, "Please wait a moment. I'll be right back." Jordan nodded, silent. He didn't ask, didn't argue. He just looked at the ticket in his hand. White paper, black letters, all the information clear: Flight A17, Seat 2A, first class. But sometimes, the most obvious things are the ones people don't want to see. Little did Jordan know that, in just 7 minutes, the people around him, the people who thought they were on top, would lose everything. And he, the man who was considered a system error, would become the center of a reawakening about justice, dignity, and how the world views skin color. The plane hadn't taken off yet, but the atmosphere in first class had begun to change, slowly, silently, like a piece of music changing keys without anyone noticing. The first-class cabin was brightly lit, and the air smelled of new leather and the light perfume of those used to flying. Jordan took a few steps inside, ticket 2A in hand. He always chose a window seat, where he could see the city shrink below as the plane lifted off. Megan Hartley, Aurora Air's chief flight attendant, greeted him with a smile practiced over thousands of flights. The smile, perfect in shape, perfect in tone, was gone in 2 seconds as her eyes scanned the boarding pass. She squinted slightly, as if the print on the ticket had blurred. She looked down, looked up at Jordan, then looked at the ticket again. There was no question, just a pause, just enough to catch the attention of everyone behind her. I recognized the moment. It lasted no more than a blink, but long enough to be read. Doubt, the cold light that clung to my skin like dust. "Mr. Carter," Megan said, her voice soft as if afraid she might hear it herself. "There seems to be an error in the system. I need to confirm with the gate before I can seat you." Jordan tilted his head, unsurprised. "My ticket is 2A, he said evenly. "I checked in at the VIP counter, printed my boarding pass there. Yes, I know, but the Aurora system has been a bit glitchy lately. I just need to confirm it to be sure." She said it as if to reassure herself, but what caught people's attention was not her words, but her gaze that was no longer on the ticket. It stopped on his skin color. Behind them, the line began to build. A silver-haired businessman frowned and looked at his watch. A middle-aged woman cleared her throat, looking annoyed. In the small compartment, everything was playing out like a play without dialogue. Everyone was choosing their roles: the observer, the impatient, and the one considered the reason for the delay. Jordan remained still. He said nothing, offered no excuses. His hand tightened on the strap of his bag, not in anger, but in memory of his father's words. "When they doubt you, don't try to prove it. The truth doesn't need to be screamed." Megan turned to her colleague, whispered a few words, then picked up the walkie-talkie. Her tone changed to business flight A17, check seat 2A, possible duplicate ticket. The phrase duplicate ticket flowed through the air like a gentle accusation. The people behind him began to whisper. Jordan heard a few fake ticket wrong class, maybe a mix-up. No one said it out loud, but it was clear enough to sting. There he stood, between two rows of shiny leather chairs, a young man in a white shirt, a gray tie, and shiny black shoes. Everything was right except that he didn't seem to belong. I used to think that if I was successful, dressed properly, and behaved properly, people would stop judging me by the color of my skin. But here, in first class, I saw clearly prejudice doesn't need a reason. It just needs an excuse. Megan was still talking on the radio. Her voice was low and awkward. She turned to Jordan and tried to smile. "Could you step aside? We need to let other passengers board first." The phrase "stand aside" still sounded polite, but in that confined space, it felt like a way of telling him to get out of the picture. Jordan stepped aside. He leaned lightly against the cabin wall. Silently, the passengers behind him began to pass. Some avoided his eyes. A few smiled politely. A middle-aged man muttered, "Always some mix-up when they upgrade too late." No one intended to offend, but no one realized they did. Megan continued to check the ticket with the scanner. The screen still showed valid, but she was still not reassured. She whispered to her colleague in a low voice, "Is there any chance someone used a fake corporate card to make the purchase?" Jordan heard, not because she spoke loudly, but because in such situations, the ear is more sensitive than the heart. He flipped open his phone. Calm. The confirmation email was still there. Aurora Air confirmation. A17. Seat 2A. Purchased by Carter Global Holdings Platinum corporate account. It couldn't be more clear. It couldn't be more wrong. He held up the screen, just so Megan could see. She looked at it, nodded slightly, but said, "Yes. Please wait a moment while I check with the gate. We have to follow the procedure. Process. A familiar word. People use it to rationalize everything irrational." Another flight attendant approached, quietly asking if Megan needed help. "It's okay," she replied. "I just wanted to make sure before I let him sit down. Him, not Mr. Carter. Just him." The way he addressed her could be more revealing than the apology. Jordan looked out the cabin door. The last passenger had boarded. He was alone, an unwanted stoppage in the smooth operation of the luxury airline. The air in the cabin became thick. A woman in row 1B turned around and whispered to the person next to her, "I thought they checked this before boarding." The other person replied, "They usually do. Unless." then trailed off. Unless a word hung in the air, not needing to end for everyone to understand. Jordan breathed slowly. He smiled, almost imperceptibly, not because he found it funny, but because it was the only way to keep from reacting. I knew that if I said another word, they would use it against me. So I kept silent. Silent, not to endure, but to wait for the truth to speak for itself. Megan stepped out of the compartment, ticket in hand. Jordan stood still, watching her, looking so calm that a passenger mistook him for a staff member. The man shook his head and whispered, "Poor guy. He must have messed up his ticket." The door was still open. The engine noise faded. The chatter in the cabin died down, but the air was still heavy. The young man was still standing, right where he was supposed to be, but he was being treated like an intruder. No one knew that this quiet moment would be the spark. From a flight attendant's suspicious look, from a small verification, a system would be exposed. But at this moment, Jordan just stood still, calm, quiet, like someone used to being checked, used to being scrutinized, used to waiting for the world to realize that he had nothing to prove. Somewhere in his mind, he heard his father's voice. Justice doesn't always come in a shout. Son, sometimes it just takes one man to be quiet enough to let the world see he's wrong. Outside, Megan was talking to the gatekeeper. Little did she know that with each passing minute, a thin thread was tightening around her own career. Jordan, on the other hand, adjusted his cuffs and waited. As Megan returned to the cabin, the intercom in her hand still lit up. A woman's voice rang out from behind her, slow, confident, and full of commanding habit. "Excuse me, miss," said the woman. "I think there's been a mistake. I always sit in 2A on this flight. All movement in the compartment stopped." Jordan turned his head, meeting the eyes of the person who had just entered. She was in her early 70s, with neatly curled silver hair, a silk Hermes scarf around her neck, and a large white gold ring on her finger. Margaret Whitmore was a familiar name in the upper-class East Coast. Her family once owned a regional banking chain and a stake in Sky North Airlines, Aurora's direct competitor. Those who saw her said, "Mrs. Whitmore needs no introduction. Her money does the talking." Megan's demeanor changed instantly. The smile returned no longer the forced polite one, but a mixture of fear and respect. "Oh, hello. Mrs. Whitmore. It's so nice to see you again. I'm sure it's just a system error. Could I see your boarding pass?" She held out her slightly crumpled ticket, a first-class ticket, also numbered 2A. Megan glanced at it, barely needing to check, and nodded. "Yeah, right. Probably a glitch in the seat-matching software." She turned back to Jordan, her voice quieter, more polite but also more distant. "Mr. Carter, it looks like this seat is duplicated. I'll need a moment to process it. Could you temporarily sit down in economy, just until we confirm?" The words back there came naturally to her, but in this space, they sounded like a boundary. Jordan looked at her, his voice low and clear. "My ticket is 2A, paid from Carter Global Holdings corporate account. I believe it can be checked in a few minutes without me leaving my seat." Megan stiffened for a moment. She knew the name, Carter Global Holdings, the big partner. But in that moment, between the pressure from her longtime client and the young man before her, she chose the most familiar course to side with the one the system trusted more. "Mr. Carter," she said, "I just want to make sure everyone's experience is comfortable. You understand, sometimes we have to be a little flexible." "I totally understand," Jordan replied softly. But flexibility shouldn't mean I have to leave a seat I've paid for. Right. The air in the cabin began to thicken. A few passengers in front turned. One man whispered, "Old lady first. Always." Another nodded slightly. Mrs. Whitmore remained standing. Her eyes on Jordan, no obvious malice. Just the look of someone accustomed to being given priority. "Young man," she said, her voice soft as if she were lecturing someone on manners. "I've been flying this flight for 10 years. Seat 2A is always reserved for me. You don't want to cause trouble, do you?" Jordan tilted his head slightly. He looked straight at her, neither challenging nor condescending. He simply said, "I think the system will know who was listed first. Ma'am, Mrs." Whitmore smiled slightly, a smile somewhere between pity and arrogance. "Of course. I believe in the system. It's just, nowadays everyone can wear a suit and hold a first-class ticket. You know, all young people like to try the experiment. Her young people isn't about age. It's about avoiding another word, black." Megan tried to mediate, saying quickly, "Mrs. Whitmore, we will arrange it right away. You can sit down in 2A temporarily. I will make sure this problem is handled in a few minutes." She turned to Jordan, her voice lower. "Please sit in the back compartment for now, while I notify the gate. Once I have confirmation, I will invite you back up. Back seat." The word hung in the air, heavy as a stone. Back where the lights were dimmer, the seats closer, and where people like him were supposed to belong. I heard my voice in my head. "Don't say anything. Just watch them do their job." Because in America, justice often begins not with the reaction, but with the patience of the offended. Jordan didn't move. He was still standing by the aisle, between seats 2A and 2B, the light reflecting off his cheekbones. Megan waited a few seconds, then lowered her voice. "Mr. Carter, if you don't cooperate, I'm going to have to call security. We don't want to delay the flight." The phrase non-cooperation, like system failure, is the perfect cover for all sorts of bias. Jordan nodded, his eyes unwavering. "Do what you think is right," he said softly. The air in the cabin was thick. "Mrs." Whitmore sat down in seat 2A, took off her scarf, and buckled her seat belt, looking satisfied. "It's a good thing you're sensible. Megan, people have forgotten what customer loyalty is these days." The words were light as air, but enough to establish a class boundary, a boundary that Jordan was not invited to cross. He looked around. A woman in row 1B, younger, maybe 40, looked at him and then looked away. But there was something else in her eyes. Not pity, but recognition. Sometimes, just one person seeing me is enough to prove I'm not crazy. Jordan took a deep breath and put the ticket back in his pocket. He didn't argue or defend himself. He just walked silently back toward the compartment door. Megan spoke softly into the radio, calling someone at the gate. Mrs. Whitmore opened her travel magazine and put on her reading glasses, as if order had been restored. But in that order, there is a small deviation, and it will soon shake the whole system. The light in the cabin was still soft, but the atmosphere was different. The young man who had just been told to go to the back was the same man who would make the entire Aurora Air crew bow just a few hours later. Now he stood still, calm, as if letting the world unfold in its own right. I don't need to shout. Sometimes, silence is the loudest voice. Megan returned to first class a few minutes later. Mrs. Whitmore was still sitting in seat 2A, a travel magazine open, occasionally sipping water. Everything seemed to be in order restored, at least as the privileged were accustomed to defining it. Jordan stood near the aisle, ticket in hand. He said nothing, just looked at Megan. She stopped in front of him, her businesslike smile strained. "Mr. Carter, I checked with the gate. It might be a rare system error. I just want you to cooperate and sit back until we get it sorted out." Her voice was even, but there was something tense in her eyes. Jordan took out her company card and membership card and said slowly, "Carter Global Holdings Platinum Membership. Our corporate account is billed directly to Aurora Air. All tickets are automatically confirmed. If necessary, you can call corporate relations right away." Megan took it, looked at it, then back at him. She nodded, but her hand still held the card tightly, as if it were evidence to be examined, not confirmed. I knew that look. It was no longer a technical doubt. It was the kind of look that said, "You have to prove you're worthy to be here." "Mr. Carter," Megan said, her voice lower, "I don't want to cause trouble. But if you continue to refuse to leave your chair, I will have to call security to handle it. It's the policy." The words "call security" rang coldly through the air. A few passengers raised their heads. A woman in row 1B frowned slightly, while a man in 1C pulled out his phone, turned on the camera, and started recording. Jordan remained calm. "You can call, if that's what you think is right," he said, his eyes never leaving Megan. "But before you do, make sure you look at this ticket." He held out his boarding pass again. Megan looked, but her eyes were already averted. "In the front row, Mrs." Whitmore cleared her throat, as if to remind herself that her time was being wasted. "Unfortunately, things are so confusing these days," she said, looking at no one in particular. This airline never used to let strangers wander into first class. The words passed like smoke, but left a heavy echo. Some people smiled awkwardly. Others pretended not to hear. No one spoke. I realized that the silence of the crowd is often not accidental. It is complicity wrapped in politeness. Jordan didn't reply. He just placed the ticket and card on the small tray near the door of the compartment, his voice still calm. "You can keep them for verification. I'll stand here until everything is clear." Megan frowned. "Mr. Carter, you're interrupting the boarding process. I don't want to have to handle this in a official way." The word official sounds heavy, like a sweet threat. Jordan looked around. The others began whispering. A young man in row 3 pulled out his phone and started recording. A low sound, a click from the camera, and a few curious looks. A middle-aged man whispered to his wife, "There's always some problem when they let corporate accounts share miles." His wife replied, "It's not about that. Look at him. He's calm. Doesn't seem like a troublemaker." The words were small, but they reached Jordan's ears. He didn't turn around. He just stood there, his hands clasped together in front of his stomach. Megan took a deep breath, pulled out the intercom, and dialed a number. "Call security to gate B7 first class. We have an uncooperative passenger," she said. The atmosphere in the cabin changed instantly. The murmuring stopped, replaced by a thick silence. People looked at him, not as a businessman with a wrong ticket, but as a guilty man awaiting judgment. "Mrs. Whitmore raised her eyebrows, pleased. She rearranged her silk scarf, leaned back in her chair, and said loudly enough for the others to hear, "It's a good thing they're keeping quiet. Everyone should know their place." No one answered, but there were a few nods. Jordan remained silent. The light on his forehead came from the window, a cold light that made his figure seem almost detached from the rest of the compartment. I could talk. I could scream. I could remind them that my father was Leonard Carter, whose company had millions of dollars in shipping contracts every year. But if I did that, I would be no different than them. So I chose to stay silent, to see how justice would take its course. The sound of the engine outside the cabin door drifted in, steady and distant. Another flight attendant appeared, whispering to Megan, her eyes avoiding Jordan. "Security is approaching," she said softly. Jordan nodded. "Thanks," he replied, his voice so light it sounded like he was saying something harmless. In the cabin, several phones continued to record. A young man said to his friend, "Man, this is going online for sure." The other chuckled. "If he gets dragged out, it'll hit 1 million views by tonight." The story took a different turn. It was no longer about a ticket. It became a performance of power, prejudice, and silence. Megan stood near the door, looking serious, but her palms were sweaty. She knew she was walking a fine line between procedurally correct and ethically incorrect. Still, in that moment, she chose the safer side, the side that her superiors praised as handling the situation quickly. Mrs. Whitmore looked out the window, sighing as if she had helped restore the balance of the world. A faint smile crossed her lips, the smile of someone who believed order had been restored. Meanwhile, Jordan stood still, ticket still in hand, eyes fixed on seat 2A. The seat was now a symbol, no longer just a place, but a silent question about who was allowed to be where. I understand. Sometimes justice doesn't come in the sound of drums, but in the moment, someone thinks they've won. Megan didn't know that every phone recording this would be evidence. She just knew that right now. She needed to get the man out of the compartment. "Mr. Carter, I need you to get off the plane now," she said coldly. "Security will deal with you at the gate." Jordan nodded. "Okay," he said, and that was that. He bowed slightly, not a bow, but a way of saying, "I don't need a little win." Then he turned and walked out of the first-class cabin, between the rows of bright leather seats, where eyes followed him, half curious, half relieved, as if order had been restored. No one knew that, in just a few minutes, that very order would collapse not with anger, but with truth. The footsteps echoed across the jet bridge floor, slow, heavy, and steady. Everyone in first class turned. The first man to appear was Officer Daniel Brooks, an aviation security officer at Midland International Airport. He was a large man, broad-shouldered, with a collar that clung to his skin, a square face, and eyes accustomed to commanding. There was a type of man who, by walking into a room, without speaking, let others know they believed they were in charge. Brooks was that type of man. Megan stepped forward and greeted him quickly, her voice small but urgent. "Officer Brooks, this is an uncooperative passenger. He refuses to leave his seat and is disrupting the boarding process." She spoke quickly, smoothly, as if afraid she would change her mind if she waited a second longer. Brooks nodded, not asking any more questions. He didn't look at the ticket, didn't ask Jordan, just glanced at him a quick glance, enough to determine who was causing trouble. "Sir," Brooks said, his voice hoarse and even, "I need you off the plane. Now." Jordan stood still. He didn't react, just looked straight at the man in front of him. "Do you want to see the ticket?" he asked. Brooks shook his head. "No need. They informed me of the situation. This is not a negotiation. This is a flight safety directive. I understand. When they say flight safety, they mean peace of mind for those who don't want to see me here." The air in the cabin thickened. A few passengers silently pulled out their phones and filmed. The small sound of the cameras clicking sounded like the click of a gun being cocked cold, emotionless, and precise. Jordan nodded slightly. "Okay," he said, his voice soft. He bent down and picked up the small bag from the foot of the chair. He moved slowly, not missing a beat. Megan stood aside. Brooks took a half step back, as if he might explode at any moment. Jordan stepped out of row 2A and walked down the aisle between the rows of light leather seats. Eyes followed him, no sympathy, no contempt, just a kind of curiosity mixed with relief. As long as it wasn't me who was being dragged away. One passenger turns to you and whispers, "Man, he looks calm, though." The other replies, "Yeah, that's what makes it weird." Brooks followed close behind, his hand on his belt where his radio and handcuffs were. Passengers in the aisle leaned slightly out of the way. A few tried not to look, but glanced at their phones to make sure they were in the right frame. There are times when silence is no longer an option. It becomes the only weapon I have. Jordan said nothing. He just walked steadily down the first-class aisle, like a man on a catwalk of prejudice. Each step was a small cut into the civilization that people were so proud of. Mrs. Margaret Whitmore sat sideways, watching. As Jordan passed, she said loud enough for the whole compartment to hear in our time. Everyone knew their place. Having money did not give them the right to sit anywhere. A few people chuckled. Brooks didn't respond. Megan bowed her head, pretending to rearrange the nearby first aid kit. Jordan paused for half a second. He didn't look at her, just glanced out the window, where the sunlight reflected off the wings of the plane. I wanted to say, "Madam, your world has ended." But I didn't need to. The world would collapse on its own, if only it could be seen clearly. He walked on. With each step, the sound of his shoes echoed strangely, reverberating off the metal of the compartment, mixed with the faint breathing of the passengers. As Jordan reached the compartment door, Brooks gestured. "This way, sir." His tone remained polite, but his body language was commanding. Jordan turned back a little. His gaze swept the cabin, stopping at seat 2A, where Mrs. Whitmore sat comfortably, a thin blanket pulled up to her legs. Needless to say, the look was enough, a calm, elusive kind of look. Then he turned and walked down the gangplank. Behind her, the cabin door closed. Megan sighed and returned to her seat. "Mrs. Whitmore said softly, as if lecturing, "I don't really hate anyone, but there are rules that need to be kept." No one answered. Only the eyes of the female passenger in row 1B continued to look out the cabin door, eyes filled with shame and confusion. Ha! Outside on the jet bridge, the air was different, cold, stark, without the hum of warm air conditioning. Jordan stood there, between two security officers. Brooks said in a recitative voice, "We'll get this cleared up later, but you're not allowed on this flight right now. Please cooperate." Jordan just nodded. "Okay, I'll wait." He set his bag down next to the waiting seat. No one said anything. Passengers walked by. Some looked at him, recognizing the face from first class. Some avoided eye contact. Some took pictures with their phones. Some shook their heads. In the rear cabin, the plane had not yet taken off. The loudspeaker system blared, "We apologize for the delay. Thank you for your understanding." A general apology, anonymous, directed at no one and meaningless. I sat down and looked out the big window. The plane was still, like justice. Sometimes it didn't take off right away, but it would take off. in time. Jordan took a deep breath and slowly opened his phone. He texted Lily Zhang, his assistant at Carter Global Holdings. Lily, there's a problem with Aurora Air. Please check the ticketing system. Seat 2A, Flight A17. Then he put the phone down and leaned back in his chair, calmly, without a word of complaint. Behind the glass, the Texas morning light was slanted, cold as metal. Everything inside him was quiet, the quiet of someone who knows that sometimes well-placed silence can make the world question itself. The waiting area at Gate B7 was empty after the last passengers from Flight A17 had boarded. Jordan sat in the metal seat, his bag at his feet, the white light from the ceiling reflecting off his calm face. Outside the thick glass, the plane remained still, as if the world had just closed its doors to him. A middle-aged woman dressed in Aurora Air Navy uniform approached. Her hair was tied back. Her silver-rimmed glasses gleamed. Her name tag gleamed. Claire Patterson, supervisor. She stopped in front of Jordan, her smile polite as if programmed. Hello, this is Claire Patterson, Aurora supervisor in Midland. I was told there was a problem with your ticket. Jordan raised his head. I don't think there's a problem. Ma'am, my ticket is first class, seat 2A, purchased on my company's corporate account, Carter Global Holdings. Claire nodded, sat down on the opposite chair, and kept her voice light but cold. Yes, I heard, but according to our chief flight attendant, your ticket shows signs of irregularity. Recently, there have been many cases of customers deliberately forging ticket codes or illegally upgrading with reward points. She said it with the calmness of someone who believed she was acting professionally. There was no malice in her voice, just absolute faith that the system couldn't be wrong. Only people could cheat. Jordan took a small envelope from his pocket. Inside were his boarding pass, ID, company card, and a printout of the confirmation email. He placed each item on the table, orderly, without a word. Claire glanced over, frowning. You know, documents can be forged. They've gotten really good at it lately. Subtle. I hear that word more than I like. It's often used to make innocent people prove they're not fooling anyone, Jordan replied. I believe the airline can check directly with corporate relations. My company booked this ticket 3 weeks ago. If necessary, I will call them immediately. Claire didn't reply, just smiled faintly. We'll do that when we need to, but right now, I need to confirm that you bought this ticket legally. Can you walk me through the booking process? The question sounded like an investigation. Jordan briefly explained my assistant, Lily Zhang, booked the ticket through the Carter Global internal account. The ticket was paid directly from the company card. I received a confirmation email with the ticket number and electronic receipt. There were no changes after that. Claire took notes, her pen moving quickly. She nodded, but her eyes remained skeptical. Okay, but I have to be honest with you. We've had a lot of fakes lately. These people often act very professional, dress well, speak politely to fool the staff. Jordan looked at her. Not angry, just sad. He understood that, in Claire's eyes, his politeness was not a sign of dignity, but of trickery. I'm so used to people complimenting me on my educated speech, as if it were an exception. Miss Patterson, he said, his voice calm. I think I just had a little misunderstanding on the plane. Now you're talking about the possibility that I'm a fraud. Don't you think that's a little too much? Claire smiled slightly. Mr. Carter, I was just following the procedure. I'm not saying you're a scammer. I'm just saying we need to verify. You know, safety and reputation come first. Jordan was silent for a few seconds, then took out his phone. "I will have someone from the company verify it for you," he called. Lily Zhang's voice came from the other end, young, quick, and professional. "Jordan, I'm in the travel office." "Is everything okay?" Jordan said slowly. "Not really. They suspect your ticket is invalid. Can you check the booking system? Aurora Air A17 seat 2A, paid from a corporate account." Lily paused for a few seconds, the keyboard clicking. "That ticket was locked 21 days ago. Paid with a platinum corporate card." "What are they talking about?" Jordan looked up at Claire. "Do you want to hear it directly?" Claire crossed her arms, her smile unchanged. "No need. I trust you, but I still have to wait for an official response from Aurora's system. This is an internal rule. That statement is a polite way of saying, I don't believe you." Jordan held the phone out to her. "Lily Zhang, Travel Division of Carter Global Holdings. She can confirm directly with Aurora." Claire hesitated, then picked up the phone. "Hello. This is Claire Patterson, supervisor for Aurora Air." "Yes, EIC. That's right. Seat 2A. Corporate account. Right." She listened for a few seconds, then softly said yes, and handed the phone back. "Thank you." "Mr. Carter," she said, her voice even. "But you know we have to double-check. There might be a mistake in the payment system between your company and the airline." Jordan nodded. "Then you keep checking until you're sure. I'll wait here." He leaned back in his chair, unruffled, not a hint of irritation, not a sigh. People think silence means resignation, but sometimes silence is the way to make their own voice heard. Claire looked at him for a moment, then turned away. She called someone in the internal department, her voice low and urgent. In the distance, a few other employees looked toward Jordan, saying something to each other. One pointed, chuckled, and turned away. Jordan sat still, staring out the window. The A-17 was still there, not yet airborne. The Aurora Air logo on its fuselage reflected the morning sun, shining tauntingly. He thought of his father, Leonard Carter, who once said you don't have to prove your worth to people who have decided not to see it. Jordan smiled slightly, a thin, quiet smile, neither happy nor sad, because deep down he knew things were going in the right direction, the direction where justice would be revealed by the arrogance of those who thought themselves innocent. Inside the control room, Claire was still on the phone. Outside, a young passenger recognized Jordan and began filming secretly. At that moment, no one knew they were recording the beginning of the biggest airline scandal in a decade. Carter Global Holdings headquarters, 31st floor, East Wing Executive Offices, 9 a.m. Newford time. The travel operations room was always lit up. 4 large screens hung on the wall, displaying the travel schedules of the group's executives. Lily Zhang, a 28-year-old assistant coordinator, had just put down her cup of coffee when the intercom rang. She picked up. Jordan's voice came through the phone, low and even Lily. "There's something wrong with my ticket. They said it's invalid. Check it again. Aurora Air. Flight A17, Seat 2A, corporate account." Lily was stunned for a moment. Jordan Carter, Leonard Carter's son, never called directly unless the matter was really serious. "Yes. Please give me a few minutes," she replied, her voice quick but calm. Lily opened the global travel portal system, logged in with her administrator code. The screen displayed a list of board members' tickets. She entered A17, Aurora Air, Carter, Jordan. The results were immediate. Seat 2A, first class, locked 21 days ago. paid via Platinum corporate account. The payment code and confirmation email matched exactly with the printout Jordan had brought. Lily frowned slightly. There's no way they didn't see this information, she thought. She picked up the desk phone and dialed the extension of Emily Cho, head of executive travel management. Emily. Oh, it's Lily. There's been a problem with Jordan Carter's Aurora Air Flight. They said the ticket was invalid. I checked. It was locked and paid for 21 days ago. On the other end of the line, Emily's voice was low. Jordan was denied boarding. Not only that, he was detained at Midland Airport. They seemed to suspect he used a fake ticket. There was a brief silence. Emily took off her glasses and looked at her watch. 9:07 a.m. Send me the logs. I'll call Aurora straight away. Don't tell anyone else. At Aurora Air Headquarters, Corporate Relations Department on the 14th floor, Olivia Reyes, Corporate Account Manager, opened her mailbox and saw the subject line Urgent Verification Request, Carter Global Holdings, Flight A17. The email was from Emily Cho. Attached was a copy of the ticket confirmation transaction code and notes passenger currently being detained at Midland. Immediate verification required. Olivia sighed. The name Carter Global Holdings was familiar. They were a diamond client, spending tens of millions of dollars a year on Aurora. She knew that even a small mistake could cost the entire department the contract. Olivia typed a few commands into the intercom. The ticket appeared on the screen clear, valid, unaltered, payment account Carter Global Platinum Corporate, verified, booked 21 days ago, approved by Emily Cho. Olivia picked up the phone and called Emily back. Emily, this is Olivia. I checked. The ticket is perfectly valid. There was no system error. Who said he used a fake ticket? Emily replied briefly. The supervisor at Midland. They could be mistaken. Or worse, they could be acting the same way. Olivia sighed. Okay. I'll report this to VP right away. We can't let this slide as a little misunderstanding. Meanwhile, at Midland International Airport, Jordan sat on the metal bench near Gate B7. Several passengers waiting for other flights passed by, their eyes scanning him with curiosity and caution. A cleaning lady recognized him as the one who had just been removed from first class. She paused for a second, then bowed slightly. Not an apology, just a gesture of understanding. Claire Patterson turned back, her expression no longer as stiff as before, but still maintained her administrative tone. Mr. Carter, we are verifying with Aurora's corporate department. It will take a few minutes. Jordan nodded. It's okay. I can wait. He took out his phone and looked through Lily's message thread. Lily Zhang, sir. I checked. The ticket is completely valid. Emily is working directly with Aurora. They confirmed it right now. Jordan finished reading, put the phone away, and folded his arms across his chest. He said nothing more. I've learned that when I'm right, silence can make others see their own mistakes more clearly than any argument. Claire stood a few meters away, talking to a colleague. Her voice was low, but Jordan caught a few words sophisticated fraud. Big companies have been impersonated before. No evidence, only prejudice. 10 minutes passed, then her desk phone rang. Claire answered. Olivia Reyes's voice was quick and concise, leaving no room for her to interrupt. Supervisor Patterson, this is Olivia Reyes from Aurora Air Headquarters. Mr. Jordan Carter's ticket is completely valid. He is a VIP customer on Carter Global Holdings, Platinum Corporate Account. All payments are authentic. He has not committed any violations. Claire was stunned. Really? But the head stewardess said I don't care what the flight attendant says. We have proof of payment and system logs. He was a legitimate passenger. And remember, Carter Global is a high-level strategic partner. Any issues with them go straight to the executive board. The phone landed heavily in Claire's hand. She swallowed and turned to look at Jordan. He was still sitting there, silent, as if he had never moved from his seat. She approached, her smile trying to regain its professional air. "Mr. Carter, I just received confirmation. It seems, there was a slight mistake. My apologies for the inconvenience." Jordan stood up, his voice so calm it confused her more than the reprimand. "It's okay. I just hope next time someone says little mistake. They understand that sometimes. It's enough to hurt a person." Claire smiled wryly, avoiding his eyes. In the distance, a few passengers were still filming. Jordan turned away without another word. The morning light fell on the floor, long as the shadow of truth slowly but surely reaching its destination. I don't need to scream. Sometimes, just hearing your own voice on the recording is enough to get justice. When Claire Patterson bowed her head in final apology, Jordan merely nodded. He said nothing more. No complaint, no request for reparations. He just looked at her for a second long enough for the woman to see that she had just lost something. She could never regain respect. Outside, the sun was high. Aurora Air Flight A17 pulled out of the gate, 35 minutes late. No one on board knew that in that moment. A crisis was brewing not from screams, but from a few taps on a phone screen. Men. Oh. And mark me. Wow. Oh. In row 3C, Hannah Kim, 32, a marketing employee at a media company in Newford, still couldn't take her eyes off the video she had just recorded. The scene lasted only 28 seconds. A black man in a gray suit was let out of first class. He didn't argue, didn't react, just walked in silence. Behind him, an elderly white woman sat down in seat 2A, adjusted her blanket, and smiled faintly. The audio in the video was someone whispering, "Unbelievable, still happening in 2025. Hannah opened the X Twitter app. She typed, "Just witnessed something uncomfortable on Aurora Air Flight A17. A calm, respectful black man with a first-class ticket was escorted out, so a white lady could have his seat. Crew said it was a system error. It didn't look like one." Flying while black bark Aurora, she attached 3 photos. Jordan standing still, eyes looking straight ahead, holding his ticket. 2. Officer Brooks is signaling him to leave the plane. 3. Mrs. Margaret Whitmore is seated in 2A with an order-restored smile. Hannah looked back at the caption. She hesitated for a second, then pressed post, below. The view count increased almost immediately. 101 $12. Then a series of comments appeared. They did what twice you're flying while black never ends. Someone tagged Aurora Air. This needs answers. He handled it like a king. Within 30 minutes, the hashtag or flying while black was trending in the Texas area. By noon, a second hashtag appeared, by Aurora. In her small office in Newford, Jenna Collins, a reporter for the Daily Chronicle Online, received a text message from a colleague. "Check this thread. Something's blowing up about Aurora Air." Jenna opened it. She looked at the photos. In a flash, she recognized the face of the man in the video, Jordan Carter. She remembered that last name, Carter. The nation's most prominent black family, the owner of Carter Global Holdings, a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate with a presence in nearly every sector from finance to energy. His father, Leonard Carter, was what Forbes once called the man who changed the definition of black power. Jenna smiled slightly. Oh my. Aurora just hit a hornet's nest. She started typing. Breaking viral video shows a black passenger being removed from Aurora Air first-class seat for an elderly white woman. Internet users identified the man as Jordan Carter, son of billionaire Leonard Carter, CEO of Carter Global Holdings. Hashtags, "Or flying," "While Black," and "Aurora Air" are now trending nationwide. She clicked publish. 10 minutes later, the post had been shared more than 50,000 times. The story had gone beyond misunderstanding. It had become iconic. At Midland Airport, Jordan hadn't left yet. He sat in a cafe near Gate 14, silently sipping an espresso. His phone vibrated constantly. Notifications from mixed emails and dozens of missed calls from unfamiliar numbers. He opened X. His face appeared in a series of posts. The photos, his eyes, his gait, his composure were shared with captions that sounded like praise. He didn't yell. He didn't fight. He just stood there, with all the dignity in the world. Jordan looked for a moment, then locked the screen. He didn't smile, nor was he angry. I don't want to be a symbol. I just want to stay in my seat. But sometimes justice doesn't ask if you're ready. It just comes and takes you with it. Inside cabin, A17. Hannah Kim watched her phone vibrate. Notifications flooded in likes, retweets, messages from reporters, from friends. She looked up. Mrs. Whitmore was still sitting in 2A, unaware that her image was being spread across the internet as a symbol of privilege. Megan Hartley, the chief flight attendant, stood at the back of the cabin, her eyes flicking to her phone, her face suddenly pale. A colleague whispered, "Meg, we're going viral." Megan looked up, her eyes blank. Viral about what? The guy who got fired. People say he's Leonard Carter's son. She froze. The blood drained from her face. A moment ago, she had believed she was following the process. Now, she understood the process had just changed the course of her life. That afternoon, when Jenna Collins went live on Daily Chronicle Live, the newscast opened with her voice. An incident is making waves on social media. A black passenger was forced out of Aurora Air's first-class cabin to give up his seat to an elderly white passenger. The person who was fired from his seat was none other than Jordan Carter, son of billionaire Leonard Carter, chairman of Carter Global Holdings. Aurora Air has not yet commented. The news lasted 2 minutes, but its impact was contagious, like a fire touching a dry field. That evening, at Carter Global, Leonard Carter emerged from the conference room as his assistant handed him the phone. Hannah Kim's video played on the screen. He watched without saying anything. At the end, as Jordan walked down the aisle, his eyes narrowed. "How long has it been?" he asked. "It's only been 8 hours, sir. But it's been national. Aurora shares are down 4% in the last session." Leonard put the phone down on the table. "Call Marcus Hale, the civil rights lawyer, and have a car ready to go to Midland." His voice was not loud, not urgent, but it made the room fall silent as if all the air had been sucked out. Some people don't need to shout to be heard. They just need to stand up. Online, Hannah Kim's post racked up more than 10 million views. The hashtag #flying while black trended nationwide. Aurora Air became a symbol of what America thought it had overcome, but never really did. And in the midst of it all, the image of Jordan, the young man who did not resist, who simply stood still amid prejudice, became the face of a new movement. Dignity does not need to scream. Morning sky at Aurora Air headquarters in Chicago. Silver gray. The glass windows reflect the words Aurora Air, elevating the world. The slogan is still lit, but inside, everything is falling apart in silence. 27th floor executive office. Victoria Lang, CEO, was reviewing the quarterly financial report when the internal phone flashed red continuously. She raised her head. The assistant's voice rang out, urgent and small. "Madam, it's urgent. The Midland incident is going viral. The passenger is Leonard Carter's son." Victoria paused. The name rang like an alarm bell in her head. Leonard Carter, not just the black billionaire, but the business icon who had saved Aurora from bankruptcy in 2018 with a multi-million-dollar shipping contract. She said briefly, "Convene the executive board. 5 minutes. Conference room on the 27th floor." 5 minutes later, 4 people sat around a long walnut table. No one spoke. Only the ticking of the wall clock, clear as a heartbeat, could be heard. Victoria Lang, CEO, 47 years old, calm, low ponytail, face of someone used to crisis. David McAllister, Co., 52 years old, Scottish, husky voice, pragmatic. Sandra Wells, PR Director, 43 years old, lean, agile, the kind of person who smells a crisis before anyone else hears it. Adrian Park, Legal Counsel, 39 years old, Korean origin, sharp eyes, always speaks in short sentences. Victoria placed the iPad in the middle of the table, projecting the viral video onto the big screen. Jordan Carter, calm, walked across the first-class cabin. Officer Brooks followed. Megan stood by the door, and Mrs. Whitmore sat in seat 2A. Her lips pursed in a triumphant smile. No one spoke. The video speaker echoed through the conference room. In our time, everyone knew their place. Victoria pressed pause. "There," she said dryly. "That's the line. The whole country is retweeting it." Sandra opened her laptop and quickly scrolled through the charts on the screen. The hashtag #FlyingWhileBlack has reached 23 million hits in 12 hours. Aurora is trending #1 nationwide. The stock is down 7% in the morning. Worse yet, they've confirmed his identity. Jordan Carter. David frowned. Carter. No way. I thought Carter Global was our platinum client, not just customers. Adrian replied, "They spend over $12 million a year on domestic and international shipping contracts, and they have a crisis priority clause signed by Leonard Carter himself." The room fell silent. A typical business silence, no emotion, just calculations running through their heads. Victoria turned to the screen and said evenly, "We cannot treat this as a small incident. This is a systemic crisis." Sandra sighed. "The bad thing about this video is the man doesn't react. He's quiet, calm, even polite. The more you watch it, the more you see who's wrong." I don't know if any of them really cared about right or wrong, or if they were just afraid that the mistake would cost them money. But to them, my silence was more terrifying than my screams. Victoria nodded slightly, her voice cold, short, like a scalpel. "Starting now. We need 1. Verify all cameras at Midland, boarding area, jet bridge, and cabin. 2. Extract ticket system log, check issuance, locking, and confirmation times. 3. Take statements from relevant staff. Megan Hartley, Chief Flight Attendant. Claire Patterson, Supervisor. Officer Daniel Brooks, Security." She paused, looking at each of them. I want everything done in 24 hours. There's no room for I think." David leaned back, lit a cigarette, but didn't light it. "Victoria, do you think we should call Carter Global before they called No?" she replied. "Leonard Carter doesn't like people running to apologize before he asks a question. We'll prepare a full report. When he calls, and he will, we'll have an answer," Sandra interjected. "We also need to respond to the media. If we stay silent, it will be seen as evasive, but if we speak up in the wrong way, it will be seen as sophistry." Adrian nodded. "The only statement that should be made at this time is, Aurora Air is seriously investigating the incident. No more, no less." Victoria looked around. She saw in their eyes not just worry, but also that classic American corporate fear of touching on the subject of race. "Okay," she said, her voice soft. "Then let's get started. David, you handle the data. Sandra, prepare the media script. Adrian, I want the legal report by 6 p. Meh." Then she stood up, gently touching the table, as if closing a sentence. 2 hours later, in the central data room, David and the technical team reviewed the ticket system log. On the screen, the text was clearly displayed: Passenger Carter, Jordan, Seat 2A, First Class. Purchased via corporate account, confirmed 21 days ago. David looked at the technician. "No system error." The technician nodded. "No. Everything is legit. If there is an error, it is human." David exhaled and said softly, "Then I'm really dead." In another room, Sandra Wells watches a social media graph on a giant screen. A new tweet appears. From Agena Chronicles Aurora Air's discrimination scandal, deepened sources confirm the victim is billionaire Leonard Carter's son. Sandra swore softly. She knew that when the press used the word scandal, there was no going back. Social media is a court without lawyers. Once convicted, all you have left is silence, and hope time forgets you. That afternoon, Victoria stepped out onto the 27th floor balcony. The wind was strong, blowing the reports she held in her hands. From here, she could see the Chicago sky, wide and cold, like the eyes of the public looking at Aurora Air. She knew this was more than just an accident. This was the moment every company dreads the most, when an employee's small mistake touches a symbol bigger than the brand justice. She whispered, almost to herself, "We sent the wrong person. The wrong person." Somewhere, I sat still, watching the world spin for a ticket. They thought they were saving the brand. I knew they were just relearning the old lesson. No one can cover up prejudice with the name process. The next morning, the sky over Midland was as dull as scratched metal. The news was still flooding the internet. Aurora Air issued a statement saying it was investigating, but everyone knew the real investigation had already begun, not in the Chicago office, but in Gate B7, where Jordan Carter had spent the previous several hours. At the end of the runway, a Gulfstream G700 landed softly as a breath. The door opened, and Leonard Carter stepped out. His suit was dark blue, his eyes calm and cold. Beside him was Marcus Hale, a renowned civil rights lawyer who had won a series of national discrimination cases. No need for introductions, no need for an entourage. The two of them walked straight into the domestic terminal. Supervisor Claire Patterson stood waiting, her face pale. She had watched the news all night. She knew who she was in the story and that the man approaching her was not the passenger's father, but the man her entire airline feared. "Mr. Carter," Claire said softly, her hands shaking slightly, "we are truly sorry about what happened." Perhaps Leonard interrupted, not looking at her. "Where is my child?" Jordan stepped out of the lounge. He didn't smile. He didn't look angry. They just looked at each other for a second. The look of two men knowing that. Here. It was about more than a ticket. "Are you okay?" Leonard asked, his voice low. Jordan nodded. "I'm fine, but you should hear them. It's better than the report." Leonard turned back to Claire. "Tell me." Claire swallowed. "Sir, there was an error in seat confirmation yesterday. The staff thought Marcus Hale interjected, his voice slow and steady, as if he were lecturing on the law. Excuse me, you're talking about a technical error. Right. I'd like to see the system verification log, the ticket log, the internal camera, and the passenger detention record. I believe you have it, because federal law requires every denied boarding to be recorded." Claire paused, speechless. Leonard turned to his son. "Jordan, tell me everything, step by step." He told it. No more, no less. Just short, broken, precise sentences. Megan's change in tone after seeing the ticket. Mrs. Whitmore. Officer Brooks. The way he was led away. When Jordan finished speaking, Leonard didn't react immediately. He just looked around at the people standing nearby. A few passengers, a few cleaning staff, and even the curious onlookers filming on their phones. Then he spoke, his voice low and even, loud enough for the whole area to hear. This is not a systemic error. This is a human error. And worse, a biased error. The statement carried no tone of anger, only the weight of truth. A middle-aged man from yesterday's group stepped forward, slightly shaken but determined. "I was in first class yesterday," he said. "I saw it all." He didn't raise his voice. He wasn't rude. He just stood there, being treated like a criminal. "I'm willing to testify." Then someone else spoke up. A young woman with red hair. Speaking quickly, "I was there too. I took a video. I haven't posted it yet because I'm afraid of getting in trouble. But if necessary, I'll send it to my lawyer. They don't know Leonard Carter, but they know what justice is." Claire stood there, stunned. In that moment, she knew her sorry was no longer enough. The situation was beyond the control of an airport supervisor. It was in the hands of someone who could bring down an entire airline in a day. Leonard motioned to Marcus. "Write down all names and employee numbers and call the Aurora regional representative. I want a signed, official copy." Marcus pulled out his phone and dialed, his voice so calm it was frightening. "This is Attorney Hale. I'm with Midland International. I represent Carter Global Holdings. We're requesting the Aurora Air regional representative here within the hour, in accordance with federal regulations regarding racial discrimination complaints in public service." On the other end of the line, a panicked voice said, Yes, I'll be there soon." Leonard turned to Claire, his gaze no longer angry, but disappointed. "I've lived long enough to know that there is no system that discriminates. Only people choose to believe that they are allowed to discriminate." Claire bowed her head, her eyes watering, not from being scolded, but from realizing he was right. 40 minutes later, the Aurora Air regional representative showed up. Suit, tie, and the look of a man who knew he was walking into a media frenzy. Leonard didn't shake hands. He just said, "I want the official record, and I want to see how everyone involved in this is handled. Not because I'm Leonard Carter, because if it wasn't my son yesterday, they would have done it to someone else. The agent nodded, his voice trembling. Yes, Mr. Carter, we don't promise. Just do it, he interrupted. When everything was done, Jordan stood next to his father, looking out the window. Another Aurora airplane had just taken off. He was silent, then said softly, I think what scares them most is not my anger, but my calmness. Leonard turned to his son, a smile as faint as light filtering through clouds. That's why they can never win. I understood then. What my father taught me was not in a Harvard lecture or a Carter Global boardroom. It was about keeping your back straight, even when others want you to kneel. That afternoon, the video went viral. Leonard Carter walking into Midland Airport, past the line of people filming, without saying a word. No microphone, no security team, just a father stepping up to defend the dignity of his son and, unintentionally, of a generation. 3 days after the Midland incident, the 27th floor of Aurora Air headquarters was lit up all night long again. No one spoke of Flight A17 by its commercial name anymore. In internal records, it was simply listed as Case Carter. On the table, screens played back the cabin camera footage. No sound, just the image. Megan Hartley stepped into the first frame, her face serious, the familiar movements of someone who had been in the business for a long time. The door opened, and Jordan Carter stepped forward in a gray suit, walking confidently but unpretentious. The moment Megan's eyes met his, her expression changed. Not clearly, just a slight twitch at the corner of her mouth, and a seemingly unconscious frown. I remember that look. It wasn't hate, just a sort of judging, as if she were classifying, not welcoming. Victoria Lang sat in the middle of the conference room, arms crossed. Replay, she said. The video played again. At the exact moment Megan received the ticket, she tilted her head, pursed her lips, and flipped the ticket over as if looking for a mistake. David McAllister leaned forward. There was nothing wrong with the ticket, but she suspected him from the moment she saw him. No proof needed, just the color. Unfamiliar first-class passengers are usually screened more thoroughly. But this is clearly not normal procedure, said Sandra Wells, PR director. Victoria signaled to switch to recording at gate B7. There was a slight crackle. Then Megan's voice clear, decisive. You can tell when they're trying to game the system. The room fell silent. Adrian Park, the legal counsel, looked at his watch and said quietly, That's enough for the DOJ to open a civil rights investigation. It's no longer an attitude error. The personnel file opened. A long list appeared on the screen. Megan Hartley, senior flight attendant, 15 years of experience. Below that, a row of red warnings, 17 complaints filed by minority passengers, all resolved internally. David frowned slightly. 17 complaints. And no one noticed. The HR person in charge bowed his head. She is a longtime employee and has a good relationship with the regional manager. Whenever there is a complaint, they usually conclude it is a misunderstanding in communication. Victoria didn't speak. She just stared at the words resolved internally for a long time, as if each word was an indictment of the very system she led. Sometimes evil doesn't come from the enemy, but from the dealt-with boxes that are checked too easily. The next report was of Officer Daniel Brooks. He was accused of using excessive force against a black passenger in 2022. The case was dismissed due to lack of evidence. On his personal social media, The investigation team found photos of him wearing a shirt with extremist slogans, along with posts alluding to order and discipline. David skimmed through it and said, "We hire people like that to keep us safe." "No," Adrian replied, cold as steel. "We hire them to avoid trouble, but in the end, they create it." Finally, there was Supervisor Claire Patterson. A linguistic analysis of her emails revealed a suspicious pattern of repeated words: uncooperative passenger, disturbing passenger, unruly passenger. Investigators compared the data and found that 78% of the passengers she described in these terms were Black or Latino. Sandra was speechless. She turned prejudice into official language, and none of us noticed. Victoria closed her eyes for a few seconds. When she opened them again, her voice was steady. "Put it all together. This is not an isolated incident. This is a pattern of repeated, systematic behavior. And worse, it is protected by our silence." No one objected. That afternoon, Victoria was alone in her office. The window reflected a bronze Chicago. She opened her email and composed a message to Board Chair Eleanor Price Eleanor. "We need an emergency meeting. I wouldn't call this a scandal. This is an admission that Aurora has let prejudice operate as a legitimate process." She paused for a few seconds, then typed, "More justice is coming. Not from the courts, but from the cameras we once thought were mindless." Then she clicked send. "I don't know what they're looking at, but I believe somewhere the truth is being replayed frame by frame. I don't want them to apologize. I just want them to look straight, like I looked at them that day." That same evening, a summary of the investigation was sent directly to the CEO and Board of Directors. The subject line: Preliminary Findings, Carter Incident. Summary: Flight Attendant Megan Hartley, 17 complaints, recording discrimination, Officer Daniel Brooks' history of violence, extremist content. Supervisor Claire Patterson. Administrative language was racially biased. Conclusion: The incident was not personal. It was a manifestation of structural bias, systematically repeated in Aurora Air's internal culture. Victoria printed out the report and placed it on the table next to the company logo engraved on it: Aurora Air, elevating the world. She stared at the slogan for a long time. Then she said softly, almost breathlessly, "We have flown high, but on broken moral wings." Outside, the city lights came on. In the cold, blue room of the screen, justice was taking shape not through excuses, but through the data, recordings, and images their own systems captured. Justice needs no shout. It only needs light. And when the light shines, what is hidden in the darkness reveals itself. Monday morning. Sunlight streamed through the frosted glass of the 28th floor conference room at Aurora Air headquarters. On the desk was a thick folder marked Carter Incident, Final Findings. Eleanor Price, the chairwoman of the board, a 67-year-old woman with straight silver hair, walked in. She didn't say hello to anyone. She just put down her bag, uncapped her pen, and said, "Let's get started." Across the table, Victoria Lang sat with David McAllister, Sandra Wells, and Adrian Park. The air was heavy with lead. Everyone in the room knew that this morning would decide the fate of Aurora Air not in terms of profits, but in terms of corporate character. David spoke first, his voice low. "The stock has dropped another 8% in the past 2 days. 4 corporate partners have frozen their contracts, one of which is Carter Global. Sandra continued, quickly and coolly. The media is relentless. CNN, Reuters, and AP are all quoting the line. Aurora Air refused a first-class seat to a black executive's son. They don't say passenger. They say black executive's son, which means this is no longer an isolated incident of discrimination. It's symbolic. Victoria leaned back in her chair, her eyes looking out the window. Then we'll deal with it symbolically. No hiding. No blaming the system. Eleanor nodded, picking up the first file. Her voice was calm, but as firm as a verdict. Megan Hartley, Chief Stewardess. 17 confirmed complaints. One recording demonstrates racist behavior. Immediate dismissal recommended. David added, it says in the record, terminated for discriminatory conduct. That will prevent her from working in the aviation industry again. Eleanor signed. Each stroke was slow, but heavy as if cutting through the layer of hypocrisy the firm had allowed to persist for too long. She moved on to the second file, Officer Daniel Brooks. Security, history of violence, abuse of power, extremist content. Dismiss immediately. File referred to federal agency. Sandra froze as she signed. The public will demand his head. But not just them. The company's conscience will demand it, too. Final file supervisor, Claire Patterson, supervisor. Administrative language contains bias. Dismissed. No one objected. No one said anything. There was only the soft click of the pen as Eleanor closed it. In the corporate world, justice sometimes comes not with a hammer, but with a signature. A signature can close a career or usher in a new century of understanding. 3 hours later, the press release was sent out. The headline was simple: unadorned Aurora Air official statement. Flight A17 incident. Brief and clear content. After reviewing all the evidence, Aurora Air confirms that passenger Jordan Carter was racially discriminated against on Flight A17. We take full responsibility. The employees involved were terminated immediately for unethical conduct. Aurora Air sincerely apologizes to Mr. Carter and his family and has awarded Mr. Jordan Carter lifetime first-class status as a symbol of its commitment to making things right. The statement ends with the sentence, "There is no excuse for disrespect." The news spread like wildfire. Television broadcasts continued. On social media, people shared the video with comments, Justice doesn't always need a court. Sometimes, it just needs the truth to shine. In his Newford apartment, Jordan read the announcement on his phone. He sat by the window, his coffee long gone cold. Lily Zhang called. They fired everyone. Jordan, the CEO of Aurora Victoria Lang, signed it herself. And they sent a personal apology letter to your father. Jordan was silent for a few seconds. Then he said softly, "Yeah, but sorry can't redo that day. Still, maybe it makes someone else's tomorrow a little easier. I don't want them to lose their jobs. I just want them to understand every time they doubt someone because of the color of their skin, they are burning away a part of their own humanity." In the Aurora office, Victoria Lang sat back after everyone had left. She turned on the TV. The news showed Megan Hartley leaving Midland Airport in silence. No one was screaming, no crowd, just a woman dragging a suitcase, walking between 2 rows of people watching, as if checking themselves in a mirror. Victoria turned off the TV. She opened her notebook and wrote, "Our mistake did not begin in Midland. It began the day we allowed prejudice to be called process." At a brief afternoon press conference, Sandra Wells stood before the microphone. The lights illuminated her tired but determined face. "We are not asking for forgiveness," she said. "We just want to prove that, in a noisy world, justice can still begin with 3 words. We were wrong." Behind, a large screen projected the Aurora Air logo, a faded silvery blue. But for the first time, the light wasn't for advertising, but for illumination. Night. Leonard Carter received a letter from Aurora CEO. He read it slowly, word by word. At the end of the letter, there was a handwritten line. "I can't erase what happened, but I promise I won't let it happen again, in any seat, on any flight." Victoria Lang Leonard put down the letter and looked out the window. The city was lit up, he said softly, as if to himself. Justice does not make men richer, but it makes them stand taller. Maybe that's how justice should come. I think, no fuss, no medals, just people bowing to the truth and then starting over, slowly, but more kindly. A week after the apology, Aurora Air thought the storm had passed. But in America, justice doesn't end with an apology. It begins there. On Wednesday afternoon, Carter Global Holdings released an official statement. "We are considering civil and federal action against Aurora Air for racial discrimination in the provision of service, under Title II of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. This is not about personal gain, but about the thousands of others who have been and are being subjected to the same treatment." The statement was not angry in tone, just tight and correct in wording, but behind it was a carefully prepared system of lawyers, PR, and justice. Marcus Hale, the civil rights lawyer, was on every evening newscast. On CNN, he said, "If the son of a black billionaire is kicked out of first class, what do you think is happening to the powerless?" No one answered. They didn't need to. The question echoed long enough to become a wordless indictment. On Capitol Hill, several black lawmakers signed a petition to open hearings on discrimination in commercial aviation. The names of organizations appeared frequently: the NAACP, the Civil Rights Alliance, the Urban Justice Network. The press called it a chain effect, but to those involved, it was simply the natural reaction of a society tired of seeing the same trauma over and over again. A reporter for The Atlantic writes, "No one was surprised that Jordan Carter was discriminated against. What shocked them was that he remained calm. He didn't scream. He didn't bang on the table. He just stood there, and it was that calmness that exposed the system for what it really was." Aurora Air's stock price fell another 18% in 5 days. Major corporations from Hansen Finance to Veyron Pharmaceuticals to Stratline Technologies announced that their employees were temporarily suspending Aurora bookings. The airline's PR department called it a temporary ripple effect, but experts called it the Carter effect. On television, people compared this to the United scandal of 2017, but this time there was something else, a story with a human face and dignity. It was not about an airline, but about how people looked at each other in an airplane seat. At an internal meeting, Victoria Lang, CEO of Aurora Air, stood before a dozen regional directors. There were no slides, no slogans. She simply said, "You can call this a crisis, but for me, it's a reminder we've been flying for too long, and we've forgotten to look down." She paused, then added, almost in a whisper, "It's not the company that's hurt. It's the trust." I heard that on TV again and understood that sometimes the real apology isn't in the statement. It's in how a person admits how long he's been blind. A beam. Meanwhile, Marcus Hale and his legal team began gathering records. It wasn't just the Midland cameras. They approached more than 200 passengers who had complained to Aurora over the past 3 years, people who had never heard from the airline. A picture emerged: repeated patterns of behavior, similar statements, similar justifications, all of which formed what Marcus called a chain of operational bias. "This is no longer Carter," he said in an interview. "This is America looking in the mirror." At other airlines, internal alarm bells are ringing. SkyWest, Continental Jet, Blue Mount Air, all are quietly reviewing their customer policies. An anonymous manager told the Wall Street Daily, "No one wants to be the next Aurora. People are finding their own Megan Hartleys before the public finds them." That's the strange thing about American justice. It not only punishes wrongdoers, but also teaches others how to avoid the same path. That evening, Jordan Carter was invited to appear on the show Nightline. The host asked, "Do you intend to accept Aurora's apology?" Jordan paused for a few seconds, then said, "I have nothing to forgive, because I'm not angry at them. I'm just sad. Sad that fear caused someone to see me as a threat, when I was just a passenger holding my ticket." The host continued, "What do you think will change after this?" Jordan smiled, softly but sadly. "Maybe next time a flight attendant sees a black person in first class, they'll just think, 'Ah, a passenger,' instead of, 'There must be some mistake.' And if so, then I've got what I wanted. I am not seeking justice for myself. I just want no one else to have to choose between dignity and silence like I did." Namor. Neminetzorni. 2 days later, in a large hall in Washington, D.C., the Federal Civil Rights Commission held hearings. In the front row, Marcus Hale sat next to Leonard Carter. The television was live nationwide. A congressman asked, "Mr. Carter, do you think this is an individual or a systemic problem?" Leonard replied, his voice low and slow, as if each word were cast from stone. "The individual is only the symptom. The system is the cause. But I believe, if we dare to look at the system, we can still change it, without hatred." The room fell silent. A long moment. Then applause spread, not because of emotion, but because they had just heard that rarest thing in politics, the calmness of justice. Somewhere, Megan Hartley sat in her small apartment in Austin, watching the hearing on TV. Her face had aged. No one knew what she was thinking. But when Leonard Carter said we can still change without hate, her lips moved as if to say something, maybe an apology, maybe just a sigh. When it was all over, I didn't remember the names or the laws. I only remembered the moment when people began to listen, really listen, after so many years of silence. And maybe that was when justice stopped screaming. 3 weeks after the incident, a light rain fell over Newford, as if the city was also washing away the dust of the noisy days. Dozens of reporters were waiting in the large press room of Carter Global Holdings. Out front, a sign with a silver logo glowed, "Integrity in Motion." Next to it, Jordan Carter and his father, Leonard Carter, stepped onto the podium. No background music, no host, just the sound of cameras clicking. Jordan stood before the microphone, the light illuminating his face, calm, clear, without resentment. His voice was deep, with the resonance of one who had suffered but not been broken. "I wasn't removed from first class because of the wrong ticket. I was removed because they thought someone like me didn't belong there." The words, in the silence of the room, echoed like metal against mirror. Cold, but true. He continued, I don't want to turn this into a personal lawsuit, because if I only seek my own rights, I will ignore the thousands of others who have suffered the same humiliation without being recorded by cameras. Leonard looked at his son, his eyes both proud and sad. He understood from this moment. Jordan was no longer just the heir to Carter Global. He had become a face of justice. Soon after the press conference, the Equal Journeys Initiative was formed, a small office, initially staffed by 3 people, a nonprofit, its goal to monitor, document, and support cases of discrimination in the airline, hotel, and travel industries. Jordan said at the opening, if we can measure checked baggage, we can also measure fairness. The quote was reprinted in hundreds of newspapers. News agencies called him the face of calm justice. A month later, Jordan accepted an invitation to speak at Columbia University, where he had his first internship. The auditorium was packed, in the front row. Many gray-haired people who had witnessed the civil rights movement of 1968, sat silently as a new generation spoke of the same war, but in different terms. He recounted the morning in Midland, without embellishment or drama. Simply, I remember the feeling when they called security, and I just stood there. I thought, if I get angry, they're right. If I stay calm, they'll have to watch. Hundreds of young students fell silent. One girl burst into tears, not out of pity, but because she realized that the scariest thing was not being humiliated, but learning to endure it in silence so as not to be accused of overreacting. I used to think holding back was a sign of weakness, but now I understand staying calm is your strongest weapon when others are waiting for you to explode. From Columbia, Jordan traveled far and wide. He was invited to speak at business conferences, universities, and civil rights organizations. He never gave speeches. He just spoke softly, in the voice of someone who had walked through fire and chosen not to burn. At an NAACP event, the host introduced him as the man who made the nation take a second look at how it treated first-class passengers. Jordan chuckled and replied, I don't want anyone to apologize to me. I just want them to learn how to sit people down, without looking at the color card first. PBS made a special report, The Calm Voice of Change. In it, the video of Jordan walking down the aisle of an airplane was slowed down. There was no music, just the sound of the camera and his footsteps. The commentator said, it was a moment when America looked at itself, not in a courtroom, but in the narrow aisle of an airplane. When the Equal Journeys Initiative first started accepting applications, most came from ordinary people, salespeople, teachers, nurses. One person wrote, I was asked to get off my seat because they didn't believe I had a business class ticket. Now I know I'm not alone. Jordan read each letter one by one. He did not reply to all of them, signing the special ones with a line, You are not wrong. They are the ones who are lost. Leonard Carter often visited his son's organization office. He spoke little, just standing there staring at the map on the wall, where each red pin represented a reported incident of discrimination. After a few months, the map was almost full. You started something bigger than Carter Global, he said. I just fixed a seat, Jordan replied calmly, but it turned out to open a door. On social media, people started calling him the man in seat 2A, not to honor him, but to remind him justice sometimes begins with a lost seat. A journalist wrote, Honey, he didn't shout. He didn't bang on the table. He didn't demand compensation. He just stood up, and the whole country sat down to listen. I don't know when my name became a symbol. Symbols are what people make when they need hope. And I just want to remind you, justice isn't in speeches. It's in how you treat the stranger on the next plane. Oh well. Oh well. At the end of his talk at the Chicago Business Forum, a reporter asked, "What do you think makes your story touch so many people's hearts?" Jordan thought for a moment, then replied, "Maybe because we all had a two-way seat taken away. The only difference is, not everyone has the chance to reclaim it." The room was silent. Then the applause broke out. Slow, deep, and real. Outside, the Newford sky was turning dusk. Jordan stepped out of the auditorium, coffee in hand, and glanced up at the sky. No planes were flying overhead, but in the red glow he could see one thing clearly. Justice, however late it came, was the only thing that kept people upright. A year after the Aurora Air incident, the skies over America seemed calm, but in reality, they were not the same anymore. Major airlines, Sky North Airlines, United Coast Airways, Blue Mount Air quietly conduct internal audits, not because they want to, but because they have to. In an Atlanta office, Sky North's Human Resources Director piled a thick stack of files on his desk. 300 complaints in the past year. Many of them are identical to the Jordan Carter case. Their CEO sighed. Then we can no longer say, "It was an accident." Airlines are rolling out bias awareness training, a mandatory training course for all employees, from flight attendants to pilots to regional managers. For the first time, they are forced to learn to see what they have always denied: bias. Some call it correction. I think it's just the beginning of a civilization that knows how to admit mistakes properly. The National Airlines Association, NMOA, released the first anti-discrimination manual in the history of the industry. All airlines must report incidents of discrimination quarterly. Every word in that document was rewritten from the hard lessons learned by Aurora Air. In the opening, there is a small line in italics: "For anyone who has ever been asked to leave their seat, simply because they didn't look like they belonged there." The person who wrote that sentence was Victoria Lang, CEO of Aurora, who was at the center of the storm. She said in an interview, "No business can outlive its silence. When we speak up, we are no longer the perpetrators. We become proof that change is possible." In Washington, D.C., Congress passed the Fair Passenger Act, one of the rare bills with near-unanimous bipartisan support. It requires all airlines to regularly report discrimination complaints, make the data public, and triple the fines for repeat offenders. During the signing ceremony of the law, the chairman of the Traffic Committee read a short passage. "We can't change the past, but we can ensure that every passenger, no matter who they are, will be seen as a human being, not a suspect." In the audience, Jordan Carter sat with Ava Lee, his new wife, an Asian-American economist who has been with him since his quietest days. She held his hand gently as the cameras panned in. No one spoke. The image was broadcast on hundreds of television channels as a symbol of mature justice. Calm, not needing victory, just right. I don't think I'm the one who makes the change. I'm just the first one who was forced to stand up when millions of eyes were watching. And maybe sometimes, destiny needs someone like that, just to remind society that it's time to wake up. In the second year after the incident, business schools began including Jordan Carter versus Aurora Air in their curricula. Harvard, Wharton, and Stanford all had a seminar entitled Dignity and Power in Service Management. The instructor showed the video of Jordan being let off the plane. No sound, no commentary, just for the students to watch and ask themselves, what really makes the whole system wrong? And who is the first person to choose not to be wrong? A student stood up and said, "Justice is not about judging who is right and who is wrong. Justice is when everyone has the same opportunity to be respected." The professor just smiled. The answer wasn't in the textbook, but it was something everyone needed to remember. Well, a documentary director named Naomi Sinclair released Seat 2A, the flight that changed the skies. There was no drama, just alternating narration from passengers, staff, and witnesses. The final scene had Jordan walking up on stage, but saying nothing. He just stood there looking at the audience. The music stopped. The screen faded to black. Then white text appeared. Not all who are silent are weak. Some are silent because they know that justice speaks for itself. The film won the Peabody Documentary Award that year. That same year, the Carter Lee Foundation was launched, a scholarship fund co-founded by Jordan and Ava Lai. They announced the first grants for students of color and Asian descent who want to study aviation, tourism, and hospitality. Jordan said at the lunch, "If I was kicked out of first class that day, today I want to help others enter that industry, not with fear, but with confidence." The statement brought a standing ovation, not because it was eloquent, but because it was true, in a simple way. Since then, new billboards have appeared at U.S. airports with the Fair Passenger Act slogan, "Every seat deserves respect." The details of the Aurora Air incident are no longer remembered, but Jordan Carter's name is still mentioned in classrooms, conferences, and sometimes in new employee training sessions. He no longer had to appear on television. Now justice was in the system, silent, persistent, like the heartbeat of a society learning to stand up without shouting. I think, perhaps the most important thing is not how you were humiliated, but how you chose to react. Because in the end, justice does not need heroes. It only needs people calm enough not to give up. 5 years have passed since Flight A17. American skies are still crowded, but quieter. Not because there are fewer planes, but because people have learned to look at each other differently. In Newford, in a glass building on the riverbank, a silver sign glows in the misty morning. Carter Inclusion Partners. The consulting firm founded by Jordan Carter helps Fortune 500 corporations build cultures of diversity, equity, and inclusion. They don't sell strategy. They reteach how people treat people. The conference room this morning was filled with representatives of big names SkyNorth, United Coast, Blue Mount, even Aurora Air, once a symbol of error. Jordan walked in, still his usual stoic demeanor, white shirt, no tie. He didn't need to say much because everyone in the room knew he wasn't there to teach. He was there to remind. On the big screen, the logo of the Equal Journeys Initiative appears, the nonprofit he founded 5 years ago, which has become the largest database of discrimination in the service industry. More than 100,000 reports have been logged and analyzed, each line of data telling a story that was once overlooked. One expert presented a statistic. The rate of complaints about racial discrimination in the airline industry has decreased by more than 90% since 2028. At the bottom of the chart, the Aurora Air logo appeared in a new blue, lighter, warmer. Victoria Lang, CEO of Aurora, now in her 50s, appeared on screen during the online conference. She spoke in a calm, slow voice. "We didn't just change the process. We changed the way we looked. And maybe that's what allowed us to fly." Jordan nodded slightly. He didn't smile. For him, it wasn't a victory. It was the natural cycle of justice. Those who have done wrong, when they have the courage to right it, become part of the light themselves. 1. I used to think justice was a moment. Now I understand it is a process where people are allowed to be wrong, as long as they choose to learn the right way again. One fall afternoon, Jordan returned to the Equal Journeys Initiative headquarters. His office was simple: a few books, a framed family photo, and a wall map marking the more than 40 countries that had adopted the organization's model. His wife, Ava Lee, entered with a cup of ginger tea. "Are you reading the report again?" she asked. Jordan chuckled. "It's a habit. Each number is a person. Each person is a story." She put her hand on his shoulder. "You know, sometimes I think one humiliation, if properly acknowledged, can change an entire system." He looked up, his eyes softening. "Yes, but only if the person being humiliated chooses not to become the one humiliating others." Emma. Meanwhile, at Aurora Air headquarters, Victoria Lang walked through a hallway displaying historic photos of the airline. A black and white framed photo framed against the white walls. Jordan Carter. The moment he got up from seat 2O, no argument, no anger. Beneath it, a small plaque read, "Every journey teaches us." A young employee stopped to read, then asked Victoria, "Were you ever afraid to keep this photograph?" She replied, "No. People only fear the past when they have not learned from it." On television, the 5th anniversary program of the Carter case was broadcast. The editor opened with the sentence, "It's the story of a man who didn't shout, but made the whole system listen." The report shows Jordan speaking to the Harvard student body, then airlines signing the Fair Passenger Act. Finally, Jordan stands at the ceremony, but when the MC asks him to speak, he just says, "I didn't come here because I'm Jordan Carter. I came because every passenger, regardless of color, deserves respect. If it's a success, it's not about me. It's about us." The room fell silent. No one applauded immediately. Perhaps because everyone understood. True justice does not need to be celebrated. It just needs to be believed. I don't think any of us are destined to be icons. We are just passing through a moment where the world has to choose. Will we look down or will we look up? And if we choose to look up, then perhaps justice still has a chance. That night, Jordan returned to the small house by the river. The wind blew through the trees. The lights reflected on the water. Ava sat reading, and he sat by the window, watching the planes fly by. He remembered everything: the sound of the ticket being checked, the suspicious looks, the words back there, his father's touch at the airport, the applause on Capitol Hill. All the sounds blended into a silent symphony music only those who had been humbled could hear. I didn't win anyone. I just didn't let them take my composure. And maybe that's what allowed justice to find its way. In Midland, where it all began, a small airport hangs a memorial sign, Gate C, where change took flight. Passengers still pass by every day, hardly paying any attention. But every now and then, someone stops, reads the sign, and smiles slightly, as if they understand that, somewhere in this world, there are still people who have chosen wisdom over anger. As dawn broke, Jordan Carter opened an email from a European airline they wanted to partner on a diversification program. He typed a reply. "It's a pleasure. But remember, this is more than just a project. It's a commitment to our own conscience." He pressed send. Then he gently closed his laptop, stood up, and looked out at the gradually lightening sky. No more dark clouds, just a long streak of light, like a flight path, silent, steady, and never stopping. Jordan Carter. His story is not just about an offended passenger, but about how people react when offended. He had the right to be angry, to retaliate, but he chose to stay silent, be rational, and prove it with the truth. It was that calm reaction that made the whole system reflect on itself, that made society change. In life, we sometimes find ourselves in similar situations, being judged, being looked down upon, being deprived of what we deserve. The first emotion is always anger, but true justice lies not in anger, but in how we maintain our dignity in the midst of injustice. The story of Black CEO's son removed from VIP seat is proof that a wrong action can start with prejudice, but a right response can start with awareness. Jordan didn't just reclaim his seat. He helped society realize everyone, regardless of skin color, deserves respect. So, if you believe that kindness and intelligence can change the world, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on true, heart-touching stories where justice is not noisy, but always present. Thanks for watching. And remember, sometimes, a calm response can be the most powerful action a person can take.